Okay, Cameron McEwen and Bob Dobbs are here with episode number 31, and we've done the end of my long pamphlet on Trump and McLuhan, and now we're starting at the beginning. So we're on page, 7 or 8 or 9. Cameron has an opening statement to make.
Well, I don't know if it's a statement, but
right.
I just want to bring up what has been brought up in the past, but hasn't been discussed much, and that is that there's an interesting overlap between how you want to approach Trump and how you want to approach McLuhan. So your idea in the pamphlet is that you have things that you want to reveal in and through Trump, and the way you want to do it is by revealing things in and through McLuhan. And so then the question comes up, well, how much are the two people conscious of what you want to develop through them? Presumably McLuhan was more conscious than Trump, but I think your approach to McLuhan is that there's not only interesting new stuff to be found in McLuhan, there's also stuff that McLuhan was doing that McLuhan himself either didn't develop or didn't even know was there.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I find interesting in you is that you knew McLuhan, spent a lot of time with McLuhan, and you have this kind of interesting perspective that in the depths of McLuhan, there are undiscovered depths.
Yeah.
And I see one of my roles in our conversation here as trying to bring you to places where you can comment on that.
Yes.
So,
you're doing great.
Example,
you're doing great so far in the first 30 episodes.
Well, maybe. I don't know. If you're happy with what we're doing, then I'm happy with what we're doing.
Okay.
So in interrogating what's going on here, one of the things that I noticed, and I don't even know what page this is on, but you have a great phrase of the Global Village Theater.
Yes.
Which is not a phrase of McLuhan's, but is a phrase of yours, where you find stuff in McLuhan that he didn't develop.
Right.
And I would say it's a kind of unconscious or subconscious of McLuhan that you can channel. And it's interesting to hear you do that.
Okay, well, I just searched it, and I'm saying there's part of the book is me explaining stuff to a listener. And I say there's this tetrad on the radio in Laws of Media, and it says, what does radio flip into? And it says, this is in the book Laws of Media, the Global Village Theater.
Correct.
And then I say to this listener, I had never seen that phrase before. Not global theater, but the Global Village Theater. Interesting phrase. It's like halfway to the global theater evoked by satellites. That's the first quote to point out. What is the global village? So scrolling down. It doesn't, okay, get down here. Then I have a quote. McLuhan on Orwell. Utopians and anti-utopians are always obsessed with a period preceding their own. Orwell's 1984 happened in 1930. That's page 75 in Take Today. So then I go, Orwell's, is what I'm saying to the person, Orwell's 1984 was a big deal in the 60s. 1984 was coming. The professors had no clue that it had happened 50 years before. And then I have this really great quote from Letters, January 51. McLuhan said,
yeah, it was a letter to Pound.
Right. Current illusion is that science has abolished all natural laws. Nature now pays 5 million%. Applied science, now the master usurer. To hell with our topsoil. We can grow potatoes on the moon tomorrow. How are you going to expose that while there is still human life on the planet? Life in quotes. So I'll say it again. How are you going to expose that while there is still human life on the planet? So I then say, nobody, playing off the 1951 quote, I say nobody cares about pollution in 1951 because we're going to go to the moon. And I go, how are you going to expose that to all of the nature lovers created by the Gutenberg galaxy? You're a general citizen. Look at McLuhan. He's really doing science fiction. He's saying, quote, look at where we're at. Nobody can see what I see, unquote. And people are worrying or saying, quote, the bankers are the usury. Then I say, Linda LaRouche and the John Birchers are complaining about the nasty bankers charging interest. That's non-Christian. The Arabs aren't allowed to do that, but according to McLuhan, it's not the bankers doing it, it's applied science. How is applied science doing it? How is technology taxing us? And it's going to keep eating up everything, and then we won't have any topsoil. We won't be able to grow potatoes anymore, and we'll just go to the moon. But try to explain that to people, the ones who still think there's life on the planet. There's McLuhan intuiting the, quote, planet of the dead in 1951. He's seeing a science fiction vision that has already been realized. Whatever horrible science fiction vision people read back then, that was still coming down the pike. But McLuhan was saying that it had already happened. So you're with me. You're looking at that part, right?
Yes, sir.
And I say he's retrieving the original meaning of science. He was just a wise philosopher back in the manuscript days. It got more specialized with the printing press. But he's retrieving all meanings of science. He's making a new wisdom, not just a new gadget or a new specialist law. He's going to include that. But it's very comprehensive. The new science. Scientists had traditionally invented things and didn't care about the effects of what they had created. McLuhan said, quote, no, we're going to have to start looking at the effects. And then I have a quote from the Gutenberg Galaxy, page 32. And as our senses have gone outside us, Big Brother goes inside. So then I say, right. Big Brother was outside, quotes outside. Big Brother was outside in the period before World War II in fascist countries and communist countries. The police
Let's just, one sec, Bob. Let's just think a minute about the transition you're making here.
Yeah.
You're going from McLuhan seeing stuff in the early 50s and describing to Pound sort of what his problem is in trying to explain to people what they're actually doing as compared to what they think they're doing.
Yeah.
And the word "goan," which he says, how are you going to expose that, G-O-A-N, is a Poundian expression, right?
Yeah.
So when McLuhan was writing to Pound, occasionally he would try to use Pound lingo.
Yeah, Pound street language, but it was not street, it was prairie language, or wherever he came from, Iowa or someplace. You know what I mean?
He came from Idaho.
Idaho, right.
Yeah. So the thing is, we're talking about science and science fiction and all this sort of stuff, and then after the quote, you're into Big Brother.
Yeah.
And the question is, how is that transition made? And I think myself that the way that that's happened is that the science that McLuhan was talking about, which you say was really science fiction, has a direct application to government, to
politics,
spying, to war making, in short, to modern life.
Yes.
And so what you've done is you've gone from McLuhan talking about science and what science can do, especially in cybernetics, to its application. And its application, you might say, is Big Brother.
Yes. No, it's a good, I'm pointing out that, people, the conventional bullshit wisdom is that the guy missed politics. He wasn't political. His whole vision was darkly political. The new politics that the intelligence agencies were doing. They were operating as if the medium was the message or the massage. And so get people into that point. Actually, they have nothing but conspiracy on their TV shows and movies, so the young kids should, bring it. They might be interested in that. Okay, here's a philosopher who's talking about the conspiracies, the deep state, and all that. That's
correct.
That should attract
and that's how,
a reasonable person.
That's how you end the whole book.
Yes, with the Catch-22, the merger, the black market,
correct.
and war. Yeah.
Right. So this gets into this transition that we're talking about has a whole series of layers to it.
Yeah.
And this series of layers eventually is going to implicate what you call the tech body.
Yes.
And I myself am not sure what sort of thing the tech body is, and because I don't understand that, I don't understand the transition to it, but I can see that sort of coming up.
Yeah, with this by just going through this page here, what we just did.
Absolutely. And the transition you make from science to politics.
Yeah.
And that's we agree that that's in everything that McLuhan writes.
Right. And the conventional blindness was that he missed out in politics, right?
Correct.
He thought he was a romantic idealist or something.
Utopian.
Yeah. And he's criticizing both the utopians and anti-utopians with that great quote. But
that's right.
So you see that this is going into McLuhan like this has never been done before. To jump into what McLuhan was and nobody noticed it, to bring that out right away is very useful on my part.
Well, I guess, Bob, I think somebody might be doing a blog with ideas along those lines.
No, not with McLuhan. They don't know. I've looked. I've never seen.
I'm talking about my blog, Bob.
Oh, well, do you do that? You're off in philosopher land.
Well, what I do is attempt to show the depths in McLuhan that aren't seen.
Okay, you do that. But do you go into this kind of stuff? 1984, Big Brother going inside. Have you?
Yeah, sure. I call that State of the World.
Oh, okay.
So that State of the World is one of the topics on the right-hand side of the.
I haven't read them. Are they more recent written stuff? The last, say, 3 or 4 years?
No. I've been doing that forever.
Okay, so you knew what I'm saying. You knew that the political part of McLuhan was missed by everybody.
Well, you see, I take a different approach to all this than you. I don't regard it as important or even noteworthy that people have missed it. I take it for granted that people don't know how to read McLuhan, and then I attempt to show how he should be read.
Great.
But as we were saying before we got recorded, I think most people appreciate that as soon as they read a little bit of my stuff, they realize it's radioactive, and they stop.
Yeah, it's going to screw up their minds. It's actually a real philosophy in that sense. It's poisonous or radioactive, which the greats always are. Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let me just read a little bit more here. I'm enjoying reading this more than I thought I would.
Well,
I'm getting into the mood. I'm haranguing. I'm going, Big Brother was outside in the period before World War II in fascist countries and communist countries. The police walked around and kept everybody suppressed. But after World War II, with the bomb repressing everybody is terrified of the bomb, then Big Brother went inside and started engaging in surveillance, not walking around with a gun to intimidate the chemical body. Now, I would add, I don't know if I bring it in here, but I would add that the cities got taken over by the mafias through the unions. So the mafias took over the pre-World War II Nazis and fascists walking around with guns. It became the mafias, and McLuhan does talk about that in Take Today. He mentions the mafia element. You know, he doesn't.
But it's not just the what can I say? The surface level mafia. I mean, what McLuhan means by mafias is developers and city planners and all this sort of stuff, and in general, all of the hijackers.
That's right. He calls it the big con.
Yeah, it's the private takeover of public assets, which McLuhan basically regards as the story of history.
Yeah.
From year zero.
Right. Okay. Good. So, I'm saying not walking around with a gun to intimidate the chemical body. We're fully into the electronic landscape, which would later become the electric body or the TB body. So I'm beginning to explain my 5-bodied scenario right away, okay? Which is my hidden agenda is to bypass McLuhan, some of McLuhan, and bring in my development of the 5 bodies. So
right, but it doesn't get that far from McLuhan, because what you're talking about here is the same sort of stuff that McLuhan was saying already in Mechanical Bride.
Yeah.
Right? That advertising functions through surveillance.
Yeah.
It has advertising has to know what effect it has, because nobody's going to pay for advertising and for public relations campaigns unless they can be shown to work in some way. So then the pollsters come in, and of course the pollsters are 3/4 bullshit and only 1/4 actual numbers. But they don't need to be speaking the truth. All they need is to be able to convince some moron in a corporation who's got a lot of money to spend that the ad is having some effect that they want.
Yeah.
Right, and so there's that's already the big brother inside.
Yeah, and I like the way McLuhan quite early points out the role of advertising is actually to educate the society about the people, what the society is about, and why they have these things. It's a real university. The ad companies didn't know they were doing that, really. They thought it in Gutenbergian propaganda levels or brainwashing. They didn't know they were helping people understand the value of their lives and what their products meant.
Yeah,
it's a great statement by McLuhan.
You mentioned the word education and the word university for what was going on here, and those are excellent words. But people need to understand that all of the important words in McLuhan are in quotation marks, right? So education is not just what happens at the University of Toronto, but it's also not what happens with only with advertising and stuff like this. Education, whatever it is something we don't know.
Right.
And similarly with university. So all of these words are actually questions. They don't have a bottom to them. They don't have a ground. And McLuhan's whole technique is to put these words out and to listen to them, almost like a bell, and to try to figure out where their ground is. And if people are going to read McLuhan, then they have to learn how to read or to hear like he did.
Yeah, you're saying all his main themes, main words, have to be in quotation marks because it's not what you think it means. And so he talks about the blind man with his stick, right? Tapping the street to see where he is. That's advertising. What did you say? The bell? Or you said something there.
Yeah, he listens to words.
Listening.
Like the word education.
Yeah.
We can imagine that it's a bell.
Yeah.
And so it has waves coming out from it, or it has different tones, and they have to be listened to. So in a certain way, McLuhan was aware of and doing the acoustic space before he knew the phrase and before he knew anything about it.
That's right. Yeah.
But he was right, and that's the way things usually happen: the effect before the cause.
Yes, and I think people have some kind of conventional meaning of probing, I don't know. Maybe they see the person visually, querying to asking you questions. Like whenever McLuhan met a famous athlete or something, he'd ask them about their sport. Like, what did the instant replay do to your world? He investigated everybody. But he was doing the Bell thing, the blind man's cane. He'd meet Gordie Howe. He'd tap him with his cane to see what Gordie Howe was made of, what made him. And that's probing. It's a bit more, I don't know what you say, dramatic or invasive or multisensory, rather than just making up ideas and aphorisms. He lived it.
Well, it's multi-level, I think, is the most important thing for McLuhan.
Yeah, multisensory. It's part of his living, not just making up pages of prose.
Right, but when I say multi-level, that's different from multisensory, in that even what is multisensory can have all sorts of different levels to it.
Yeah.
And what happens with probing is that it exposes multiple levels, and then it raises the specter of maybe the levels don't come to an end.
Yes.
And so the whole question of groundlessness always is being kind of posed as a specter in McLuhan's probing.
Right. So the levels would be he's doing sociology, he's writing a novel, he's writing a script for a film, he's filming, doing a TV show, a TV interview. He's doing all the media in his multi-level communication style.
Absolutely, but below that is he's doing education, and below that is, well, what is education? And it just keeps going down like that.
Yeah, depth probing,
right.
Which he said would require repetition, but that means you would just put it in a different ground. What you were saying, repeat it in different.
Well, but you have to look at repetition as one of his words. So replay, retrieve,
right?
On and on and on. Recover. There's all sorts of words that McLuhan loves, and it takes you down into what's already happened, but you didn't know that it already happened. So it takes you from the past into the future, which is the present.
Exactly. Remember I was just telling you before we started recording that Carolyn was a closet McLuhanite? All her products begin with remite, restructure, remag, renew. She got into the RE. I had never thought of that before. It's McLuhan's RE.
And doesn't her website?
Yeah, Reset. RNA Reset.
There you go.
And now the world oligarchs over there in Switzerland, the Davos Forum, are calling it the global reset.
That's right. And so maybe RNA research, maybe the R in RNA is actually a re.
Well, it's
RNA, but with a bracketed E after the R.
Yeah. And what do you get? Ribonucleic and deoxybobby, whatever DNA is, deoxy or something. But Carolyn started talking about the RNA because of ION 11 years ago. And then suddenly, through the past decade, RNA became a big research thing. And now you've got mRNA killing everybody, Yeah. That's M for McLuhan, RNA. Or memory. The M is actually for messenger. Yes.
But there's lots of essays and books about McLuhan that call him the messenger.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. I mean, that's why I made the tiny note be around RNA, not DNA, because I was dealing with the Android meme and the messaging of society or communication, and that was influenced by McLuhan. That's what I was, and then, talking to Ion says that the RNA is way more important than the DNA. But nobody realized that until last 10 or so years.
So if we go back to page 8, at the bottom of page 8 has got your list of global village, global theater, global membrane, or android meme phase 1, android meme phase 2, anthropomorphic physical, and then the tech body. And so on, we were on page 13 or something like that.
Yeah.
But in a certain way, what we're doing is we're getting into the kinds of transitions that you listed before.
Yes. This inventory is organized through the following phases, making up 6 sections, shows how far McLuhan goes. Global village, global theater, global membrane, or android meme phase 1, android meme phase 2, anthropomorphic physical, and then the tech body. So you can see that it's going beyond McLuhan, but I'm trying to make McLuhan's quotes fit these changes.
Correct.
You know, McLuhan never mentioned android meme, but I'm going to show how it fits and what he did say.
But when McLuhan talks about humans being the sex apparatus of the machines, that's pretty much what android meme is, right?
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Good.
You're rephrasing certain things from McLuhan, and when we get into the anthropomorphic physical, that's probably has overtones in what McLuhan talks about positively as the mystical body.
Yeah.
But then speaks negatively about it in terms of the pseudo-mystical body, the acoustic in which the church can get just as lost as it can in the visual.
Right. So that's good commentary. So we're at, I said...
you were just going to get into echelon on page 13, I think it was.
Right. Are you finished commenting?
No, I just wanted to point out that what you're doing here on page 12 is you are getting into the transitions that you had already capsulated in that list that we were talking about. Yeah. So as we go into the electronic landscape and the electronic body and into your multiple bodies, what we're doing, I believe, is going into the depths of McLuhan.
Yeah.
If he maybe didn't see everything that you're talking about here, and he certainly didn't name it in the same way, but once you look into the overtones of what McLuhan was talking about, you find a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, and I pull together the quotes to show that.
Correct. And then end the whole book by saying, look, here's what I was talking about. Do you get it or not?
Yes. So I say we're fully into the electronic landscape, which would later become the electric body or the TV body. That surveillance is the chief characteristic of the TV landscape, from advertising to echelon. Echelon is actually the West's solar surveillance organization. You know about echelon?
I've read the wiki link that you supplied.
Okay, good. It's the beginning of surveillance in many types. That's the new enemy. There are lots of science fiction stories in the 50s and 60s about some fascist or communist guy coming in, dominating the planet and killing all of the chemical bodies. And it's a replay of the first half of the 20th century. The Nazi fear, the yellow fear. But after, what was it, the yellow fear or the yellow?
Yellow peril.
Peril. Yeah, okay. But after World War II, and this is in my casual talking to somebody, so I can get away with not being perfect in the oral thing here and saying yellow fear. But after World War II, the dominator becomes invisible. People didn't even know they were being surveilled. They didn't know that Big Brother had moved into the information circuitry. McLuhan is most informed on that new factor in society. That's right. So then then this great line from Explorations 1957, not Big Brother is watching, but all the brothers. That's pretty neat. Nobody points out that line. That's a good one to, say when you're next on The View or 60 Minutes interviewing you, say, not Big Brother is watching, but all the brothers. It's good. It's multi-leveled, McLuhan's pointing out. There's not just one big brother. It's all kinds of brothers. That's an important point.
I was just going to say, this gets back to the multi-level insight that we were just talking about.
Right.
Once the topic of Big Brother is brought up, it implicates levels below it, and when it does, it's very difficult to know if it's got any ground to it.
Right.
It threatens to just open up into nothing, into something that's so unimaginably evil or so unimaginably amorphous that it can't be conceptualized, it can't be, there's nothing can be done about it, and it sort of falls through itself into a generalized, terrifying fog.
Yeah, let me compliment what you're saying there, or complete. No ground to Big Brother. Big Brother is the participatory nature of the electric environment is the audience becomes in charge. There's no spectators. Actually, Big Brother, or the bankers, are the spectators, he says at one point. But the people are running themselves, surveilling themselves. And so it's hard to figure out who is actually imposing. That's why to use terms like fascist is so silly today. Been that way since the 60s. It's not appropriate, not the right description. And so the tactile spying and talking of all parts of society with each other and everybody participating in it, you can't say who's controlling who. And I think I had another idea there. So McLuhan says society is an art form. There is no society in the sense of an organized matriarchy or patriarchy. It's just constant communication or surveillance of everybody on everybody. Everybody's engaged in daily espionage. So society is defined every day as something the White House says we are, but it doesn't hold.
It's like there being just enough news every day to fill the newspaper.
To make a sense of society.
Yeah, but what I want, there's an important point here in regards to McLuhan, and that is that what you're saying is that modern life has exposed complications, so that it's really not clear who's controlling who, and who's the audience, and who's right.
That's right.
But what McLuhan says is, but actually this has a long history of consideration, and what we need to do is we need to understand that this is actually how language works. Nobody knows who makes language. It's this upheaval of old things and new things, and somehow people know how to do it, but they don't know what's going on. They don't know how it's happened. It's just sort of there. Yeah. But then he says, but look, language has been considered forever. And what we need to do is we need to go not forward into the fog, but backwards into very great considerations of what language is. And all of those things lead up to Finnegan's Wake.
Exactly.
Which is the kind of modern consideration of both the contemporary fog and the history of its consideration.
Right, and he says somewhere in Interior Landscape, maybe around page 118, he says, for the Christian, A Christian believes that something comes out of nothing. That's language. It's something that comes out of nothing, or we don't know what it's come out of, what you were just saying.
Correct.
And, of course, that's Finneg's Wake. And when I talked to Joyce through the Evergreens, Michael Blakely was channeling the Evergreens, he said that he made sure that he erased everything at the bottom of the wake so nobody could say or find a ground to it. It had to be a nothing at the ground. So it would be a something coming out of nothing, which is what you just said the wake does. Yeah, it's exploring the act of speech. And well, just the act of people sharing knowing, which is very strange because people block on, well, I'm not knowing that much. You know a lot more than me. It's at least a lot of humor, right?
Absolutely.
Actually,
absolutely. Well, that language is funny, right? I mean, McLuhan was a funny guy.
Yeah.
Joyce was a funny guy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of funny things going on, right? A lot of the internet, a lot of YouTube is just people trying to be funny, trying to manipulate language in some way that will make people laugh or make people give them money in Patreon or something. So language, again, as soon as you think about it, implicates multiple levels and groundlessness.
Yeah, and it's the juice of our being.
Correct.
So I say the spectacle, visual space, perspectival illusion, is that there's this powerful secret cabal like Orwell presents, Big Brother, but actually there are all kinds of brothers watching you. In other words, in the advertising industry, in Hollywood, trying to figure out focus groups miming the next movie, what's the next trend? There are all kinds of Big Brother surveillances going on. It's original to say there's more than one. It's not Big Brother. It's a whole bunch of brothers watching you. So I'm complimenting McLuhan there.
Sure.
Let's see. As far as the management of the efficient causality of these new technological environments, the media, in brackets, McLuhan problematized, which is a word I heard academics using back in the 70s and 80s, right? So throw a little academic.
That's a good word.
Yeah, McLuhan problematized the simple visions of Orwell and other dystopians with some practical, optimistic options. So I elaborate that verbally by saying efficient causality is management just making sure the TV shows ran on time. They weren't interested in the effects of the media dynamics. They're just into the content dispersal, and that's efficient causality. People started worrying about freedom of speech and suppression of factors in content. The Puritanism of the 50s, they would never show a married couple in the same bed. These were efficient causality content issues that made people unaware of the formal causality that McLuhan was investigating, like how technically on the level of a formal cause and the cause of form, on the level of form there was no life anymore, let alone worrying about being put in a concentration camp. That assumed there still was life to put in a concentration camp. McLuhan problematized the 1984 vision by saying, oh no, that's way back in the 30s. And he also brought in optimistic angles on the services of the new situation. There were services to Big Brother. Everybody else was living in a state of foreboding, waiting for a terrible, horrible moment, which is a line in Finnegan's, in Ulysses, I think, waiting, something about the waiting for the next moment. Living as if every moment were his next. Something like that in Ulysses.
Yeah.
Everybody else was
quoted by McLuhan several times.
Yeah. Everybody else was living in a state of foreboding, waiting for a terrible, horrible moment or a horrible Big Brother to show up. That's what many are saying President Trump's going to do today. But back in McLuhan's day, they were unaware of all kinds of actual new freedoms for the chemical body that were happening in the 50s and 60s. That's why in the 50s and 60s there was a great increase in the reasons/excuses for festivals. It was considered quite an abundant, fun time, at least in the West. So McLuhan says, quote, your vision of this horrible 1984 is going to be too simple. There are going to be lots of non-Orwellian delights happening in our modern utopia. And then that reminds me of Postman, who says it's actually not Orwell, it's Huxley's Brave New World. the hedonistic factor that was coming in. He saw that more accurate than Orwell. But you have to have both, and more probably, not just two. So McLuhan says, quote, your vision of this horrible 1984 is going to be too simple. There are going to be lots of non-Orwellian delights happening in our modern utopia. End of quote. McLuhan saw practical, optimistic options, which shocked most of the literate people. They couldn't believe that McLuhan appeared to be optimistic. But he wasn't completely optimistic because he would make an inventory of both the services and disservices, which would be the not, right? He'd show the cul-de-sac. He would do both, and nobody did that because they would make an opinion about how bad it's getting or how great it's going to be. That was the range of the debate. Nobody read McLuhan back then, and McLuhan used to point that out, that nobody read him. But when the baby boomers or younger generations had to come up with some PhD or something, they had to read the guy, and they noticed, oh, he didn't have a point of view about this. Nobody knew that when he was popular. It was surface, S-U-R-F-A-C-E. It was all surface. McLuhan, when he first talks to Michael Horniatz or something in 1976 and says he's a manipulating satirist, he says, I deal with the surfaces of life, the manners, surface manners. You know what I mean? And it was surface, S-U-R-F-A-C-E. It was all surface. That's capital letters, S-U-R-F-A-C-E. It was all surface. People were too distracted by the proliferating new environments, which admonishment McLuhan repeated often. What generally prevailed was the silly Neil Postman vision. Quote, everybody was amusing themselves to death. Yeah, they all get stuck with that guy.
Let's just point out that when you say it was surface and then you have the capital letters spelling out service, you have surface in quotation marks. And that gets back to what we were just saying about all of the important words are in quotation marks. So when McLuhan is dealing with surface, he may be dealing with something that is seemingly obvious, but he is always looking at it in a multi-level way.
Right,
so
and also you pointed out it's right. There's no background. It's all foreground. Everything's in your face.
But the even surface has multi-levels.
Yeah, under the face.
Right? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Under face. Yeah, it's. I don't remember other than how you're explaining. I don't remember what I was actually thinking, other than he said it was surface to Michael Horniansky. But I don't know why I italicized it. Maybe I was thinking what I just said. Everything's up in our face, you know what I mean? Or inside us, gone through our heads. It's inside us, so we had no perspective.
Well, I think, if I had to say what's the transition going on here, I think what you do is you show that McLuhan's not interested in a dualism.
Yeah.
He's not interested in something that says everything's going to hell, and he's not interested in everything's fine.
Right.
So in that case, what is he interested in? and what he's interested in is the complete obvious stuff.
The cliches.
The new words that people are saying, the new trends, the new fashions, the new music. What do these things say? What are these things trying to tell us?
The new enthusiasms.
That's right. And the one way that this could be expressed is simply to say he's interested in surface.
Right. And
but of course, nobody knows what surface is.
Right. And he says in his essay in Lewis in 44, he emphasizes the word appetite. All is appetite, and he italicizes it. Then that gets into his great quote in Hot and Cool. It is the dynamic symmetry of tensions among proportions. That's the golden section. Yeah. But the interaction of symmetry and ratios and proportions is what he's interested in. And he even says that's the Thomas vision, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so there's no favoritism there. He's looking at the ratios.
Right. So one way to understand the quotation marks around surface is that not only is surface eminently questionable, but it's also plural.
Yeah, surfaces.
People have a million different surfaces that they're interested in and that they think is obvious. And in your jump to hot and cool, and the idea that this resonance can be surface, that's very important, right? That means that if we want to understand surface, probably we have to understand resonance, and that tells us that surface is not one thing, that it's already plural and multi-level. Because resonance...
A symmetry of tension among proportions, and what was I going to add to that? The juggling of your senses, and what senses is not just your physical sense, it's making sense, or the semantic word that comes with your situation. So the user is the content, is the ratios you prefer or think are obvious, and you don't know that you've been conditioned to have certain ratios prominent in your tensions than other ratios.
Yeah, and then there's ratios that are going on that you have no idea about.
Yeah,
but they're there.
Yeah, so that's
right. So just the use of language. Excuse me. The use of language is juggling ratios, and people do it successfully, but they have no idea that they're doing it.
Yeah. When I'm acutely aware of what we're talking about and I'm interacting with somebody, I'll look at their sensory ratios, what senses they're interacting with. Now, neurolinguistic programming, they look at where your eye looks, up, left, right. It means a certain visual bias. You know about that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at people, and they're juggling the words and meanings as we interact, and I'll think of McLuhan quotes, and I'll laugh. It's like McLuhan has given me a running commentary on my private thoughts as I'm interacting, talking with somebody. He's given me the soundtrack, and I'll see it in people's living, which can evoke humor.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we began today, I was trying to say something along the lines of what you're just saying now.
Yeah.
I didn't know that that's what I wanted to say, but your explanation now about McLuhan sort of being in the background and giving you a real-time commentary on what's going on in your mind and in the other person's mind,
right?
And in the space and on the space between you. I think that's kind of how you wrote this pamphlet, number one. And number two, it's what I try to evoke in our conversation.
Yes. Well said. That's what's going on here. So then I have this quote. Oh, I jumped ahead. Culture is our business, page 104. Surely it is not unbelievable that decision makers are totally out of touch with the world they live in. How could any contemporary person in any age be entrusted with powers carefully developed and monopolized by people from the previous time? That's explaining Big Brother, or the deep state, or tradition, or the surveillance establishment, or
society. The Roman Catholic Church.
Yes, the churches and all the bureaucracies. So I always thought that was a great quote.
Basically what it's talking about is the rearview mirror.
Yes,
it's talking about the retention of Gutenberg perspective in electronic times.
Right. So people look to the politician to be up to date and responding to the new pressures and changes, when actually, to go into the bureaucracy of politics, you have to connect to the Byzantine history of who the previous intelligence agencies were, and you got to find out that history. You got to find out who's who in the attempt to find.
If you're interested in how they work and what they're thinking and stuff, it's not going to do you any good if you want to know what's really going on in the world.
Right. So people think that power, you get to be a politician and you then get access to the secret trilateral commissions or whatever, the secret societies, and you think you're going to find out some amazing new information, but all you find is what McLuhan found at the Bilderbergers meeting in '69. They're so out of date, they're totally out of touch with what's still going on in their own families and their children. Right. And he found that at Bilderberger, and he kind of knew it, but it shocked him because he thought there'd be all these cool European aesthetes there, and they were all stick in the muds and had no clue what he was talking about, which was the present. So this statement from 1970 probably was formed the day he got back from the Bilderberger meeting in May '69. It's like the other one. Must we continue to mow down the Kennedys to show that the hot politics don't work in the cool TV scene?
Right.
So these are great quotes that I'm highlighting. And let's see. I just hit the thing. So we're doing, I don't know if we're going to read everything, but going through what I said is sort of an interesting way to do it. And you can comment, or if you want to go to something that don't have to read.
The problem is I have, throughout the book, I have stuff that I've highlighted, but the problem is that the highlighted portions are not linked in a way that most people would follow. I think you wouldn't have any problem going from some highlighted portion. For example, I've got out of touch highlighted here, which for McLuhan always has to do with tactility.
Yeah.
So when people are out of touch, they are missing what's most important. And that gets back to what you were just saying about resonance and the proportionality. McLuhan. That's right. So then the next thing I have highlighted is the superlative nobody on the next page.
Right.
So, I mean, you wouldn't mind talking about the superlative nobody, and we could talk about that forever. But I think it may be too much of a jump to
get its
really get across to people that may be listening. So I think that the slow way of reading passages, we don't have to read all of them.
It works.
Going the way we're going, I think, is more efficient than jumping to my highlighted passages.
Yeah, after I read it, then you can point out where you highlighted. After I've explained it. So then I go, referring to the out of touch, I say what Marsh McLuhan's pointing out here is people like Richard Nixon, when they ran for president, they seemed so obsolete and out of touch with the vibrant world of the global theater in the late 60s that people wanted some radical Dick Gregory or somebody in there.
That's happening now. Now.
Right, and Dick Gregory did run for president in '68. He was in the Peace and Something Party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he probably got 4 votes.
Yeah. The people wanted some radical Dick Gregory or somebody in there, somebody who had charisma in popular modern terms, but they didn't understand that there were these huge environments built up over 500 years, including the Big Brother environment, which had gone inside. And then, if you're going to be allowed to manage the world through an obsolete bureaucratic management focused on the White House, there's the ongoing manipulation of people by advertising on the formal causality level, and all the other activities that were distracting people and mutating them into a non-life planet of the dead. But someone like Nixon had to go back and find out about Project Paperclip. That was bringing the Nazis over to set up the CIA. But someone like Nixon had to go back and find out about Project Paperclip and all the secret maneuvers that the intelligence agencies were doing after World War II that the people didn't know about. You had to find out about it and then shut up. Even Frank Zappa said this when he started thinking about running for president. That was about 1991. quote, I became aware by talking to people in Washington, it's quite a Byzantine process. So that's a good, honest statement. You know, he found out it was way more complicated even to become a candidate. The Byzantine process. The cliche of the Byzantine bureaucracy of 1,000 years before in Constantinople. There are all kinds of elites that became prominent in the 17th century and then were superseded by the 18th century and 19th century elites. Each technological phase created new kinds of elites, and they still got their big bank accounts overlaid on each other. You've got to find out who's actually in control, because whoever wants to be president is going to have to be educated in how you will have no power. So you've got to find out who actually knows to prove to you have no power. They don't admit, the secret societies don't admit they have no power either. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that this isn't talking about Trump, but that's what happened to Trump.
Yeah.
Right? That he just didn't know enough about the political system to survive.
Well, I would say that he did know a lot about the establishment, having been in New York and all that through the years. He didn't know how to alter it, adjust it, expose it. He didn't know how to communicate the cul-de-sac. He thought knowing who they were was enough. And he did know who they are, and he's still nailing people, as you will see. You don't know that Trump's coming back. And that'll make this book even more relevant. He's coming back.
Maybe. But he didn't, his whole presidency was weakened, attenuated by his inability to control the levers in Washington enough, not to be investigated, not to have the significant portions of the bureaucracy and the military working against him, even people that he appointed.
No, that's true. And so he's a great teacher. He showed the people who put so much into him, the common person had no clue what was going on. They thought, oh, wow, this is a guy, he's a businessman. He knows how to get things done. And they've had to realize over the past year, what the hell happened? How come our powerful president couldn't stay in power? And they are learning through the audits and all kinds of the cheating that went on. It's a big educational project that Trump is providing. And, okay, so he gets knocked out for a few years. He'll be back in. And what he's going to be back in charge of, I'll just give you a hint, is a new feudalism. They're going to get rid of the legislative and the executive and judiciary. That's collapsing. And it's going to be a semi-civil war. And it's starting this past couple of weeks. It's gotten very intense. Fauci's yelling at Paul. Paul's yelling at Fauci. The Democrats are trying to get committees to investigate the Republicans. And the Republicans are trying to come up with committees to investigate the Democrats. This is going to be quite funny, even though disastrous. On top of that, more and more people will be dropping dead from the Delta variant and the Lambda variant that's coming. So get ready. Shit's hitting the fan again, and more violently, more intensely. So I think what I just described is what McLuhan saw coming. He saw this collision of so many complications. Remember, he said the idea of a philosopher king could not be a balancing factor in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then the American version of Larry Flint, who I did a play on it, Furry Lint. Trump is Furry Lint in the White House. He's aware of all the different parts of the basement and the upstairs of society. He's part of it. He's got a bad rumor, bad image, and all of it. But people thought, okay, this guy really knows what's going on, and he's going in there, he's going to fix it. So there's a desperation going across the population now. I pick it up just from watching blogs or whatever one watches, my ESP, my daily espionage. There's a desperation. People say, fuck, nobody can fix this. That's what's terrifying people right now.
Uh-huh. So that's what I call, we've been talking about levels and the ground giving way after you've gone through a whole series of levels. You worry if there's any end to them.
Yeah.
And once you start doing that, then you see the ground opening up beneath your feet, and that's something that McLuhan was talking about forever.
Right. And what is it? There's no finish line. It's the last line, and culture's our business.
That's right. Although, don't you say somewhere that that's wrong?
I can't think of that right now. I might, but far from my thinking. Well, how could it be wrong?
Yeah, I know. I think it was something that Ed put up on the website. But anyway, let's not worry about that.
Well, okay. He did have a statement, and it was a headline, and he had me saying it, and it wasn't me, and I got him to change it to Dave. This guy named Dave said it. I'm just wondering if it was not something I would say, and it looks like Bob's saying it, and I got him to correct it, so you may not. That might be what you're thinking of.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so you got each technological phase created new kinds of elites, and they've still got their big bank accounts overlaid on each other. You've got to find out who's actually in control, because whoever wants to be president is going to have to be educated in how you will have no power. Or I should have said, how he or she will have no power. You'll be, as McLuhan said, quote, the automated presidential surrogate will be the superlative nobody, which is an awesome statement. One of his best. Because the president is not the president. He's imitating a president. He's a surrogate. And he has to be a superlative nobody. He has to get close to the ground. He has to shut up. Once he finds out approximations of the ground, he can't talk about it. Now, they actually do have that. When you become president, you're briefed on the stuff that nobody but the president can know. You know about that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then that makes you a nobody, because you say, geez, this is better than I thought it was. But we can't say that. We must keep the drug companies going, keep people in tension and fear and sickness. Can't tell them how great it is. That's the opposite.
We should point out that the phrase, the superlative nobody, is a perfect example of McLuhan humor and is kind of his imitation of Joyce.
Yes.
The superlative nobody is funny on a whole bunch of different levels.
Yeah, that's Humphrey Chip and Earwicker. That's HCE in Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah. But the idea that you could have a superlative nobody is already funny, just without even thinking about it. And then nobody has no up and down, so there can't be a superlative to it.
Right.
And then people are spending all of their lives and all of their fortunes in order to become a superlative nobody, even though there is no such thing, and it's not going to get them anything, right?
It's so like the phrase global village. The village is not global, It's village, local, global. Contradictory on one of the surfaces. Yeah, so superlative nobody is a contradiction, but that's how you make insight poetry, through bringing together opposite terms, and that's the nonsense of language, of communication.
Yeah. Correct.
And we find temporary patterns or meaning in it, but it doesn't hold up as you look closer at it. It becomes a black hole.
But it also gives, that's true, but it also is what generates humor.
Yes, and pattern and a sense of coherency for a moment or two.
Yeah.
That's what's interesting, is that you get insights into the conversation, and what someone says is so appropriate and apt, and he or she nails it, and then you get into talking, and then you're lost again, and you wander around, and then you make another one, another pattern that sparks the mind.
Correct.
It puts it in order. So you're actually talking yourself into order all the time, temporary patterns of order. And he has that in the brain chart. He has two kinds of order. There's the left hemisphere I think it's abstracts order or something, and then the right hemisphere has significant patterns of order or something. It's two different ways of saying a sense of something making sense. Have you ever noticed that in the hemisphere chart?
Sure.
There's two abstractions or intellectual coherence, two different ways of saying it. Okay.
Yeah. So, but just wait a sec. We need to understand that when people are going about making order, I think that's the phrase you use.
Yeah.
And I think you said that that's what they're doing 24 hours a day. 24/7. Of course, at the very same time, they're making disorder.
That's right.
And they're making disorder not only individually but collectively.
Yes.
And we're now doing it juggling atomic bombs. So we have no idea of just how much disorder we're making and what its effect is going to be in the future.
Yeah. So there's two kinds of wisdom. There's the person who says, well, we don't know what we're talking about. I'll shut up. So they're the wise, quiet archetype. But the opposite is someone who's talking like McLuhan, who pretends to know what's going on and that he's making sense, right? That's the other kind of wisdom.
Yeah. The second one is being a superlative nobody.
Yeah. So automated presidential surrogate will be the superlative nobody. And you see, since, say, Eisenhower, maybe it includes Eisenhower, the presidents were nobodies. They were scum. They're the bottom of the barrel, usually, like Nixon. Now, Carter tried to be a superlative somebody, or he looked like one, or they thought he was, and he's still trying to prove he's superlative somebody because he goes around helping people make houses and shelters, and he's considered the worst president by a lot of people. And Reagan, who obviously didn't know anything, didn't even know where he was, is considered the great communicator. What absurdities, constant absurdities going on here. Right?
Yes, absolutely. So then people have to keep in mind that ultimately you're going to be talking about Trump here.
Yeah.
And that kind of dialectic is also going on with him. So
why are people so outraged? He's just continuing what everybody already was.
There's a flip side to all of this stuff.
Yes.
Right? So the outrage just sees the guy as totally villainous, and the flip side of that is him seeing stuff that needs to be seen. Yeah,
and saying it. He's the most radical president in terms of the military. He says these are all useless wars. We've been doing it for decades. We've got to stop this. I'm pulling everybody back. Boy, who said that? That was the radical student dream in the 60s, was to get a president there who would pull everybody out of the American empire around the world, militarily. And, of course, that was never going to happen. And then Trump actually got a simulation of some kind of peace in the Middle East for a couple of weeks,
Yeah, for a couple of weeks. Yeah. Well, he was... all of these things have two sides.
Yeah.
Right? So Trump did a lot of stuff to make the Middle East worse.
Well,
but
you can't not.
He also tried to do things that would make it better.
Right.
So
and like they say, he ignored the allies, went around visiting the dictators, making friends with the evil guys, like North Korea. I mean, the average person, a sensible, quote, sensible, well-adjusted person, must have thought, what the hell's going on here? We have an insane guy in the White House. How did he get here? The people who've got children and drive their kids to school and have to be sensible. You know what I mean? This guy is not sensible.
Well, that's what they were told.
Yes.
24/7 on the media.
Yes. And now, each thing is a progression, paradoxically. There is a change. And nobody had the scandals that Trump had, you know, and the words he said. And it was worse than Clinton and Lewinsky Gate, you know, talking about pussy. I got a great kick out of that word being on CNN, you know, in people's living rooms. Or, well, maybe they don't have living rooms anymore, you know, in suburbia. Do they? I think a little bit. They have that. Do they even have a TV in suburban homes now? If everybody's got
huge ones.
Oh, that's right.
Over the fireplace.
Right. Okay, so like I don't see that. We don't have that, but they're probably in some of the houses here. But I haven't seen that much. But I know if I go through a regular mainland suburbia, I would see that, but not in this sort of utopian tropical setup. You don't see that too much.
I'd be surprised, Bob. You know, my parents used to live in Rancho Mirage in a super wealthy enclave, and
but that's mainland.
Surprising.
That's mainland.
Yeah,
I'm here in tropical paradise with palm trees.
I know exactly where you are. And, I will bet that 95% of the people there have typical housing.
Big screens.
Absolutely, and they watch CNN.
Okay, you know, actually I have seen that in a couple of places along the walkway, these big things that people rent. Now let me do a survey. Hey, Carolyn, when you walk around here, do you ever see houses with big TV screens?
Oh, yeah, everyone's got one.
Okay, well, you won that point, Kim. Their new child. But I don't see any. But I don't walk around that much. But a lot of the houses, there's nobody in them. They're Canadians. They just come over for the winter. Anyways, I only know big screens when I walk to the beach and in those houses at Wailea Point. They've got big screens, but they're tourists.
Yeah, you jump over the...
Oh, yeah, I go the back way. That's right. I don't even walk through this compound. Yeah, you hear that? I don't even walk through it. That's why I don't see any.
True.
I walk along the golf course. Anyways, so you've got to become a nobody to become a president. You've got to become too busy making connections, and you're usually in the lawyer world, to the actual establishment. McLuhan saying, quote, McLuhan is saying, quote, you people are running around and asking your presidential candidates to be hip modern people who hung out with the Beatles. You don't realize you live in a world of huge environments that have been building up for over 500 years, and they have to be understood, where they came from and how they're part of the modern global theater. Then I say, McLuhan's saying that, hey, you of course know that the president has to be a guy totally out of touch. And I go, it's a little satirical there by McLuhan. Then McLuhan says, surely it is not unbelievable that decision makers are totally out of touch. Then I say, do you know why? Because they've got to live in the past. They've got to find out about all of the previous rearview mirror bureaucracies. So this is a put-on question here. He's saying it to the young students in his class. Quote, you know, how can any contemporary person be relevant? You want someone who's not relevant. End of quote. And then I say that was the prevalent mood in the 60s. Bring someone in who's relevant. McLuhan would gently hint, quote, what you young people don't realize is that you actually live in a post-human world where there are huge environments that you're manipulated by and engage in and enjoy. And you don't know where the rulers came from that are now in charge, unquote. Then I say, all of which Lyndon LaRouche's global network of journalists would document as much as possible. Who was who going way back? That's what LaRouche would do. And that'd be called conspiracy theory. If you documented who knew what and who brought over the Nazis in 1945 and who started World War I, and you track it back. But that's
so. Let me just point out that you have the sentence in the middle of some quotations where you say it's a little satirical there. That's what we mean by saying that all of his words are in quotation marks.
Yes.
But they can never be taken as some kind of surface with one meaning.
Right.
They're always semantically rich, as the academics say.
Well, Ian says in every theme, every topic, there's always two conversations.
Right.
And that's what you were saying earlier. There's always at least two sides. And then the book enhances the dialectic of that, and then you need the electric acoustic retrieval to get out of the tendency to make it a literate dialectic. It's actually 100 conversations going on, which is what Finney's Wake shows.
Right.
But the civilized person who's been made literate, he thinks he would be quite happy to know there were two conversations going on, because they're stressed to be a point of view. So they think there's just one conversation going on, and everybody's arguing over what's the right thing to say on one level. The equitone of the Gutenberg era. That's the big blind spot. So, and then if you...
so the Gutenberg perspective is always dualistic, but in a way that is in search of being monotone.
That's right, equitone and monotone. And if you go multi-voiced, multi-leveled, you make a collage and you're an artist. and McLuhan said that. The formula to 20th century art is to make a collage. Just move out of the Gutenberg bias and you seem to be someone who's prophetic. So that's why art wasn't art anymore. It wasn't a learning environment. The environments themselves were the new shaping mechanism that artists thought they were doing in their Gutenberg arts.
Right. So when something is supposed to be meaningful, like the church, or like art, or like philosophy has become, as soon as these things are put in quotation marks, as soon as these things invite satire, then they cease to be what they were. And that's
right.
That's happened to everything in the modern world. It's happened to government. It's happened to families. It's happened to mother. It's happened to father. It's happened to child. It's happened to literally everything.
Now, he writes a lot about that in cliched archetype. An archetype is a cliche that's been put in quotes.
Yeah.
And he plays, and he says sometimes he plays a cliche and archetype, flips it around so they play opposite roles, like Shem and Sean and Phineas Wake. But basically he does talk about a archetype. His definition is a quoted environment. Quoted. So what you're talking about, he does a whole couple of pages on quotation marks and their role.
The whole book is like that.
Yeah.
Because a quoted word is a cliche.
That's right.
That's what a cliche is.
And then you make a point. You'll make a point or write a book about the cliche, and then you've made an archetype.
Correct. So you could say if an archetype is a quoted cliche, and a cliche is already quoted, then an archetype is a cliche squared.
Yes. And that's what we meant in our album titles, Bob's Media Ecology Squared. I use that in my chart. What's interesting about the book, 1970, From Cliché to Archetype, that is exactly when McLuhan became an archetype. He was obsolesced at 69, 70. Nobody cared about him anymore. And he had arrived at archetypal status. And he got the Order of Canada in 1970. So I always thought there was a bit of a autobiographical statement there. Had you ever thought of that?
No.
You like it?
Well,
does Mikey like it?
It's interesting to contemplate. Put it that way.
All right. So I have a quote here in the middle of this talking about this. Marshall McLuhan with Wilford Watson, 1970, page 46. So he says, overkill, the technologies for total destruction of mankind and the planet create a peace in quotes, create a peace that passes all technology. Bernard Mandeville built his Fable of the Bees, that's like in the 1700s or so, on the same observation. Quote, Private vices, public benefits. See? So technically, you got to be careful of finger pointing about who's wrong and who's right and who's good and who's evil, because they're flipping all the time.
That's right. So not only is there this dynamic that's always going on, but in particular, McLuhan's humor is to put forward something like this: private vices, public benefits. And what that means is that somebody's doing something for themselves, and it may not be totally moral, but it turns out to have public benefit. But then you turn the page, and McLuhan will be saying something like, the capitalist is a man who's able to make something private that is inherently public.
Yeah.
So, for example, maybe the capitalist is able to control the water supply, or the capitalist puts up a huge billboard that's digital that is casting its message for 3 counties or something, and so the capitalist takes over everybody's visual space and is able to generate money out of that. So private vices, public benefits also works opposite, right?
Yes.
Public vices, private benefits.
He says, what was I going to say there? Private, don't know, so I'm going to say this. McLuhan seemed pretty hip to point out that and not use value judgments. That's what he's first known for. Curious guy, making commentary, and he's not saying things are good or evil. So that made him seem modern and hip. So when he died, or later, when you found out that McLuhan was a Catholic, you found that odd, because his image was this cool guy who wasn't getting lost in religious value judgments, or what people would think a religious person would do. So his image played with the good and evil cliches. Now, I can't remember what the other point was about the public, private benefits. No. Okay, so did you get that point? People were. I remember when McLuhan died, and some of these CBC intellectuals were on there, a week or so after, and one guy says, and he was a prominent neoconservative, 80s Mulroney supporting professor who didn't have any knowledge of McLuhan. He says, I was shocked to hear that he was a Catholic.
Uh-huh.
Because they thought in what I call the Madison Avenue image that this was a hip professor, and he even says in a talk in the early 60s that he was considered the beatnik professor. He says that.
Right. So people's idea of religion was that
whose idea?
Just the general idea of religion.
Yeah.
Was that you couldn't get into things like rock and roll or fashion.
Right.
That this was somehow beneath religion.
Yes.
But that takes us back to the 2 different ways of looking at contemporary society that you brought out at the start of your pamphlet. That is to say, there is the emotional, emotive, evaluative
ethical
way of looking at things, and there's the cognitive way.
Yeah.
And the reactions that you're talking about are the ethical as opposed to the cognitive.
Yes. And, McLuhan, he was striking in the 60s, but the anarchy that he predicted that was coming in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, way beyond what anybody thought, anarchy being the services and disservices multiplied, what I call Orphic Baroque spirals. McLuhan is he's not complicated enough to be relevant in the 70s and 80s, at least for surface readers. So that's why Derrida and these postmodern, post-structuralist complicators that people would read in college and couldn't understand. Remember, Robert Fulford said he can't understand any modern criticism anymore. So this complexity came in that McLuhan would appear too simple if you put it up against the Derrida. So, but McLuhan got the last insights before you went into the world of silence, and nobody's going to come up with anything after McLuhan. They're just going to be either conscious or unconscious manipulators, like he said Derrida was. Really, he did get the last word. So, okay, there's the finish line. McLuhan's the finish line.
Yeah, except that McLuhan, you can put quotes around that word too.
Yeah.
There's many levels to that, and the question of ground there as well.
Yeah. Matter of fact, the fact that there's no finish line leads to endless energy. Get beyond the friction-based society, and our technology we're bringing forth creates and is frictionless. No ending, no beginning, no marker. So this is where the software eternity that we've been living in since TV and the global theater and the global membrane are the effects of endless hardware, what we call Coldplay, endless making of electricity. That's the figure or the cause that the effects of our world have been laying out for 50 years. We've been in a cold fusion environment, 24/7, constant information that you can engage, either on your smartphone or whatever old media you have. So we're in a frictionless, and he called it a flow, on the effect level, and that meant, like he used to say, you're going to have anti-gravity machines because we're already floating. You get that?
Yeah, keep going.
So, well, I'm saying that our device that we've invented that will change the world creates endless electricity, and I call that a frictionless technology. All technologies up to this point have been friction-based. They're entropic. They wind down. They wear out. But we've been living for the brain. People can, if you've got insomnia, you can live and be stimulated for days till you collapse. Who's ever had that before? You haven't had this extension of your central nervous system outside of you, which then goes back inside of you, and your dangling ganglia are endlessly tickled. That's a new kind of distraction that could make
maybe people... there's an upside and a downside. The upside, which we can hope is going to happen, is that the frictionless technology that you're talking about is resonance.
Yeah.
But resonance isn't necessarily put to good use. Resonance is not the technology, but the principle behind a great deal of the very destructive technology that people are developing and that they're deploying. And so there's kind of, at the moment, there's kind of a race going on between these two different developments. The one towards limitless generation of energy that you're talking about, and the other is limitless generation of violence.
Yes, and that, let's see, this is where the Gutenberg rearview mirror cannot be dropped. And so we take this new breakthrough, frictionless, and we put it back into our Gutenberg framework, our visual bias. We try to say, well, how is this going to make people better capitalists, better individuals, more talented, more powerful? That's Louis Kelso's economics, which is in War and Peace in the Global Village, where he says make everybody a shareholder, the average worker. The point is they're trying to prop up the individual with this beehive effect of frictionless energy. And so as we get more and more beehived, we feel more lost because we have no anchor for our literate self, which is such a powerful impact over the last 500 years. It's a powerful meme.
Mm-hmm. So I think you're saying that the whole concept of frictionlessness is one that can be understood as potentially very positive, but at the same time potentially very negative.
Right, because we're not going to have the equipment, the sensory training to drop our Gutenberg habit and see clearly what the implications are of the new situation, which is not Gutenbergian. So we are hampered by our values, by our most treasured archetypes and cliches that come out of the Gutenberg tradition. And
right.
I mean, most education is still geared to make the student a smart reader. And and they're failing, every year it's worse and worse. They now, graduate people who can't read. What'd you say?
Definitely. No, I agree with that. It just, it seems to me that there's something important that we're getting at here, and I'm not quite sure how to say it. I'm just...
well, here's something that comes to mind. The Gutenberg bias is too old. There's the kinetic industrial bias. Maybe endless vehicles, driving, flying, moving. That's a big bias. The industrial age extended our kinetic senses. So I think partly the Gutenberg's important, but it's too far back. What do we call it? If we call electric analog media the Marconi stuff, we have a Marconi bias. We think we're broadcasting, and we don't broadcast anymore, right? What is it? It's mobile. You're narrowcasting and broadcasting and broadcatching and narrowcatching. Those are terms I made up. That might have been in Negroponte's book, Being Digital, in the mid-'80s, was it? Or early 90s? Anyways, the Gutenberg bias is not... people don't even know what it is. They could understand the Marconi bias they have. So for us, we have images in our minds of radio and TV and all the analog media that young people for a generation or two don't have. They don't have the same content in their heads as we do. Now, imagine that. I mean, people lived in, you could say people are different, generations are different, but in, slower times, medieval times, people had shared the image of trees in the valley they lived in, right? We've got people...
But are you talking at the level of message?
No. No, the images in their brains of... Frank Zingroni told me this, that he couldn't teach understanding media in the 90s to the 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds because they didn't know what a TV was as McLuhan described it. They had not experienced it. They were into the digital media, cell phones and whatever they had. There still was television around in the homes, but they really found it hard to visualize what the media were in understanding media. They didn't have that experience anymore.
I think that's
too extreme.
Very literal. Sorry?
Too extreme.
Well, no, not extreme enough. I think what Zingroni was doing there was taking what McLuhan was talking about too literally, as if what he was saying in 1967 had in mind certain literal machines, and if you didn't know what those literal machines were, then you wouldn't be able to understand the book. But that's exactly what McLuhan wasn't talking about. he was talking about getting away from literalisms.
That's why he had to change the meaning of medium 5 times.
Yeah, maybe, sure. I mean, that's an example of how the word message, say, was in quotation marks, so that it meant a whole series of things that were beyond message. And the same was true of medium. So then, the idea that people have different stuff in their brains remains, as far as I can see, at the level of content, at the level of message.
Yeah.
Because just because people don't know what a walkie-talkie is or something, doesn't mean that the way the fundamental ways in which people think have changed. They haven't. And that's true at different levels itself. We've been talking all morning basically about the tentacles of the Gutenberg galaxy retaining their power in the contemporary world, even when the Gutenberg galaxy technologies have largely disappeared. And this is one way to explain the great danger of the contemporary world. It's Gutenbergian to want to dominate, to want to be the number one country in the history of the world. But that is contradictory to the environment we live in,
yes,
which is electric and dialogical.
Right. So now Zingroni was McLuhan's worst student. You're proving that Zingroni didn't understand McLuhan, and he came to the coach house at least once a year and had a big argument with McLuhan in front of everybody.
Yeah,
and,
right, I believe that.
And he later wrote in some book, maybe the one Who Was Marshall McLuhan, he talks about going to a restaurant in Toronto about 6 weeks before his stroke in September '79. But he is writing years later, and he's saying, I regret that I didn't listen to McLuhan more. He admits he didn't get him. Or he admits that he was lazy and he should have worked and not yelled and argued with McLuhan so much. So Zingroni does, yet McLuhan, but he worked with Eric to put out the Essential McLuhan book. He got the gig. He didn't understand McLuhan, but the gig did. He got the gig to edit the collection of Essential McLuhan articles, which is called Essential McLuhan, the book with Eric.
Yeah.
So what does McLuhan say? McLuhan said a lot of tiger traps and elephant cages in there. That's what he used to say. You had to be careful. No, it's interesting you say that So I think, though, that when you say people always think the same through eternity, that might be a Gutenbergian notion. Because if you have, bicameral minds that are thinking differently pre-writing, we don't know if they're the same. So we don't know what is the same about humans or what makes people human. So we got to put that in quotes.
Well, it's true that we have to put it in quotes, but when something's put in quotes, that doesn't mean we don't know anything, or that we can't know about it or something. All it means is that the word or the area being investigated is complicated.
Yeah.
The idea that we don't know what people were thinking about in 15,000 BC, every day that's becoming less true. We're finding out more and more and more about people 15,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, through DNA, through archaeology, through botany, through all kinds of areas that are exposing things that we thought we would never know.
Do we tend to begin to realize that we've always been the same, or we, with this new knowledge, realize how different we are through the millennia?
Well, whole idea that,
can't decide.
Those are very big questions.
Yeah.
Right? Are we the same? Are we different? And one of the questions that those sorts of big issues raise is how can we get a handle on something like this? Are we being like the octopus trying to grab the pyramid, or do we have a way of getting a handle on this? So what McLuhan said was, well, look, basically there's only two different ways in which the mind can be seen to work, and that is through the Paleolithic/electrical and through the Gutenbergian. And according to McLuhan, there's all-at-onceness, which means that these two ways, either alone or in a myriad ways of combination, have always been the case. Right? That's what all-at-onceness is. So if we use that way of looking at things, what does it tell us about, are things the same or are they different? Well, the whole idea that things are progressing towards difference is Gutenbergian, because it's linear, because it believes in some kind of progression, even though the progression is going into difference.
Yeah. Right?
So from McLuhan's perspective, that can be judged to be faulty. It's not an enlightening way to look at history, because it adopts a Gutenbergian perspective, and a Gutenbergian perspective is inherently closed-minded, I guess you could say.
Why is the Gutenberg aspect of ourselves still here?
Well, for the very reason that the forms of mind are always available.
The forms of mind.
So they like the Gutenbergian form.
Yeah.
It's never going to be obviated.
What about the pre-literate or pre-Gutenberg? That's here.
Yeah, and that will never be obviated either.
And the kinetic is here, the industrial. It's interesting that the tactility of the last 100 years may be becoming an archetype. So now we're into
tactility is already named when we name the Paleolithic electric.
Yeah.
The outstanding feature of what McLuhan regards as Paleolithic electric is tactility.
Right.
And the outstanding feature of the Gutenberg galaxy is that it tends towards the elimination of tactility. A Gutenberg galaxy is inherently an uncomfortable dualism. If it were comfortable, it would have tactility. So it's an uncomfortable dualism that tends towards a monolithic perspective. So a monolithic means absent tactility. So the two perspectives that have always been around are the comfortable dualism and uncomfortable dualism. And once that is seen, then you can say, well, how could there be a family 50,000 years ago that didn't have both comfortable dualisms and uncomfortable dualisms? Right? sometimes the man and the woman in the family would be comfortable, and sometimes they wouldn't.
Right.
And so they would exemplify these two different archetypes of human being.
Right.
And in fact, the whole idea of a what you might call the archetype of tactility, if it's going to be genuine, needs to envision and relate itself to non-tactility. Because if it simply rejected non-tactility, that would be an uncomfortable dualism, and it would be Gutenbergian.
Yeah.
So the Paleolithic electric has to relate itself essentially to the Gutenberg vision. And it's because of that essential relation to otherness, the comfortable relation to the other that is tactility, that makes the forms of human being eternal or all at once, always available.
So easy for you to say. Yes, you've wrapped it up, and off to Washington you go.
Yeah. Well, remember when the McLuhan was always saying that the president has to be everybody.
Yeah.
Right?
He has to look like charisma. Look like a lot of
right.
people.
That's right. And we were just saying the president has to be nobody. And those go together perfectly.
Right.
The everybody is a nobody.
But the individualist American culture thinks charisma in pop culture is someone who's a very individualistic standout, not like everybody else. Right?
That's right.
That's the paradox.
Who cares what they think? Right? That's one of the distinctive differences between you and me, I think. I couldn't care less what they think. I don't see that it's important.
What the assumptions are in the culture?
No. Yeah.
Well, that's what we're analyzing.
That's right. But for me, it's a given from the start that the cultural presuppositions out there are useless. I'm going too far here, I guess.
Yeah, you need to get out more. You need to get out more.
I think that's right. Right. Because I don't even mean what I just said. So I have to...
What have you talked yourself into here? Yeah.
That's right.
Well, that's nice that you admit it.
Yeah, well, 94% of the stuff I say turns out to be ill-spoken and ill-thought.
Yeah, it's interesting how people talk about God all the time, and what the hell would that be? They can't conceive what God is, but it's their most used word among the people.
Except in modern times, the most word is fucking.
Yeah, that's right, which is tactile. That's tactility. No, did you notice that? McLuhan said that. Swearing is tactile.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, fucking replaced literate God. God is dead. The word became not as communicative as fucking did. It's amazing. We're old enough to be back when nobody would say fucking in public. That's all I hear walk along the beaches. Mothers with their kids and that. Fuck this, fuck that. That's all you hear. But, I can see that it's a grasping for the tactility that has been enhanced by the electric environment.
Maybe. It's been enhanced as a possibility of knowing something, but at the same time it's been numbed.
Yeah.
And people don't know it. So you have that contrast, right?
Yeah, and it helps them emphasize. They're more desperate to sound knowing, so they got to use that word to sound knowing, but in the end it's not appropriate, or it doesn't mean the certitude they're looking for. Doesn't have it.
Correct.
So
correct.
People, people are more contradictory, and they were like that before literacy or before the printing press, and they've retrieved that. The contradictory nature of people is accepted more now. What's the popular phrase? Oh, it's a complex world is one of them. I don't think the average citizen, lower classes or lower middle classes 100 years ago were saying it's a complicated world. That's where I see people have become media ecologists by instinct. They know that new environments coming down the pike are going to upset us. They don't have the naivety of the 19th century. So that basic being cautious about bringing new environments into your situation is a common awareness now. They don't know where it came from, but
it's possible that it's developing. I don't see people. Every time I turn around, there's some device that everybody else in the world seems to know about and to use, and I've never heard of it.
Right, but they can't stop using it. But they know it's going to do them in, and we're more now. That's where Coker gets into the nihilistic world we're in now, and then you mentioned that we're nihilists.
Right. Yeah, the cul-de-sac.
And pre-literate people were nihilists. I mean, that's what McLuhan said. They thought the world was a prison, and they didn't aspire to balance. They accepted the extremes of whatever the situation was. Slave societies, that quote in Explorations where McLuhan describes people hacking up the tribe next door very violently.
Yep.
I don't know where that quote's from. I don't know if it's in the Bible or something, but he's showing the hyper-violence before Gutenberg Galaxy, and we're coming back to that. And, concentration camps were the beginning of that. Huge brutality, slicing up people.
He was reacting against people saying that Global Village was going to be all sweetness and light.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of ridiculous to talk about society singular before the Gutenberg Galaxy. There were hundreds of thousands of years that there were hominids, and with who knows how many languages and how many cultures and all this stuff. And it's impossible to generalize about how they were and what they thought and all that stuff. It's a very, very complicated question.
Yep. Yeah, and yet the Gutenberg made people project the Gutenberg effect back on these people. And anthropologists made that mistake.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's why we can't do the same thing.
That's right.
We can't just talk in terms of singularities, even about Gutenberg.
Right. So people, they expect the new, total new, radical change, and if it isn't completely new, they get frustrated. They expect newness at least every 6 months. So, and that can't be done because we're paralyzed and have been killed off.
That's a very big topic, right?
Every one of our topics is big.
Yeah.
We talk big.
Maybe. But obviously,
that's what you object to the McLuhanites. They don't talk big enough.
Yeah, or I could even say they don't talk small enough.
Yeah.
That they don't get into the cracks and the crevices where the good stuff is.
Yeah. You started to say something else. What were you saying?
Well, no, I think actually we're getting close to the end here because
we are.
I'm going to need to break off, but maybe next time, or at least in one of our talks, we should talk about how the new sort of falls through itself.
Okay.
Right? If there's something new every 5 minutes, after a while you become inured to it, and you need to have more and more stimulation. So I guess that gets into the drug culture. I guess that gets into shock art and shock jocks and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So you probably know an awful lot more about that.
Oh, I do. Yes, yeah, I know a lot about that.
Right.
Okay, I get out more than you.
Definitely. In all senses of the word.
That's right. Okay, so excellent. Another great dialogue. They're very impressive.
Bob, enjoyed talking with you, and I look forward to next time.
Right, and we're at the quote is, that's back in the 1700s. That's the next conversational thing I'm going to say. Just put it in your mind.
Okay.
Maybe I'll make a note of it.
That's page 16.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah, Bobby Hull's old number.
Okay, Mr. Gutenberg, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Okay, bye.